All right, listeners, buckle up for a deep dive into British monarchs.
Ooh, I like that.
From 1066 all the way to the present day,
Yeah.
we've got a lot of ground to cover. Centuries of history.
You do indeed. A fascinating story, too.
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge to squeeze it all in, but
Yeah.
I think our mission here, our goal, is to pinpoint those key moments,
Absolutely.
the ones that really shaped the monarchy, and maybe even, the whole country, like how the crown kind of jostled back and forth with parliament for power.
You've put your finger right on it. That tension, it's a constant theme, isn't it? It runs through the whole story of the British monarchy, that push and pull between the crown and those who wanted to limit its authority.
Right, and that's what I'm hoping we can unpack.
I'm ready.
So I guess the best place to start is at the beginning.
Of course.
It's the original conqueror himself, William the Conqueror.
Ah, yes. 1066, the Battle of Hastings. Talk about a dramatic entrance.
It really set the stage for everything that came after. I mean, it wasn't just a change in leadership, right? It was like a complete transformation of England.
It really was. Politically, socially. I mean, William brought Norman laws and customs.
Yeah, and even, it's amazing to think about, but he actually laid the groundwork for the English language we speak today.
He did indeed.
But I think what's interesting about William is that he wasn't just about brute force. I was reading about the Doomsday Book, remember? That massive census that he ordered almost 20 years after the conquest.
Oh, the Doomsday Book. What a fascinating document. It's almost like a window into William's mind. It reveals so much about his approach to governing.
Right. It seems like he was really trying to understand every nook and cranny of his new kingdom.
Exactly. He needed a detailed record of, everything, really. Land ownership, resources, potential tax revenue. Imagine a king with a giant spreadsheet.
A medieval spreadsheet. That's a good way to put it.
It is, isn't it?
So William really set the bar high for the kings who came after him.
Yes, he did. He did indeed.
What about his son then? William II. William Rufus, as they called him.
Ah, Rufus. Bit of a wild card, wasn't he? His reign, it was marked by conflict.
Well,
like what? Oh, lots of things. Lots of things. He especially clashed with the church. And then, of course, there's the mystery surrounding his death in the New Forest.
yeah, that's always intrigued me.
To this day, nobody knows for sure exactly what happened.
Some people say it was an accident. Some people say, let's just say there are theories.
Conspiracy theories galore.
But either way, it just adds to the whole kind of the image of his reign is this chaotic period.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You could argue that Rufus's turbulent rule kind of paved the way for the instability that followed.
Yeah. And speaking of instability, it's hard to top the succession crisis that happened after Henry I.
Oh, yes. Henry's daughter Matilda.
Yeah, she was supposed to inherit the throne, but then her cousin, Stephen of Blois, decides to make a grab for it, and then bam!
Cue the chaos. The anarchy. A perfect name, isn't it?
It really is. It was all-out civil war, a real power struggle. And right in the middle of all that, Henry I's son dies in a shipwreck, just to make things even more messy.
Tragic, isn't it? The white ship.
It just highlights how, one seemingly random event can have this huge ripple effect on history. I mean, who knows what would have happened if that ship hadn't sunk?
We can only speculate, can't we?
Yeah. It wasn't until Matilda's son, Henry II, finally got the throne that things calmed down. And that's when we enter the era of the Plantagenet dynasty. What was it about Henry II that made him such a pivotal figure?
Well, you could say he was a reformer. He really expanded the power of the monarchy, implemented legal reforms. And of course, there was his infamous conflict with Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury.
Becket. Now that's a story for the ages.
It is, isn't it? Almost Shakespearean in its drama and tragedy.
Yeah.
But that conflict, it speaks volumes about the power struggle between the church and the monarchy.
Yeah. And then you've got Richard the Lionheart. Seems like he was more interested in crusades and battles than ruling England.
Oh, Richard. He's the embodiment of the chivalric ideal, a warrior king, famous for his exploits during the Third Crusade, especially at the Battle of Arsuf.
So while he was off fighting, who was left to actually run the country?
Well, his brother John, of course. But, John wasn't exactly known for his finesse.
That's putting it mildly. John's reign is practically synonymous with Magna Carta.
Oh, yes. Magna Carta. That's a landmark achievement, really, in that whole struggle between the monarchy and, those who wanted to limit its power. It established that even the king was subject to the law.
Which is a huge deal.
It really is. It had far-reaching consequences for how England was governed, even to this day, you could argue.
It sounds like John's reign really set the the stage for that push and pull between the monarchy and parliament.
It did. And it only intensifies as we go through the subsequent reigns.
So like Henry III and Edward I.
Precisely. Both of them faced challenges from the barons, who wanted more say in how things were run.
Which eventually led to what?
The development of Parliament, essentially, as a way to balance out the power of the king.
It's amazing to think about how these early monarchs, like their decisions shaped not just the monarchy, but the whole way England was governed. It's a lot more than just a list of kings and queens, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's about the evolution of power and how that power was negotiated and contested over time.
Yeah, and it's not over yet. We still got a long way to go in our deep dive. But before we move on to Edward II and Edward III, and things get even more complicated.
Oh, yes, they do get complicated.
What stands out to you about these early kings? Like, how do you think they set the stage for what's to come?
That's a good question, I think. Well, what strikes me is how insecure they must have felt, constantly having to fight for their power, to consolidate it, and how that need to secure their position really influenced their decisions. What do you say?
I think you're right. It's like they were always looking over their shoulder, worried about who might be coming for their crown.
Exactly. And that fear, that insecurity, I think it plays a major role in the story that unfolds.
Yeah, for sure. They weren't exactly sitting on comfy thrones, were they? It makes you wonder if any of them ever really felt secure.
I think you've hit on something there, that sense of insecurity, that constant need to hold on to power. Well, it really comes to the forefront with Edward II, doesn't it?
Edward II, right. Wasn't he the one who had a rather unfortunate ending? Something about a hot poker? I seem to recall reading that somewhere.
Let's just say that Edward's removal from power wasn't exactly a peaceful retirement. His wife, Isabella, and her lover, Roger Mortimer, they orchestrated a coup, forced Edward to abdicate.
Wow.
And then, he died. Under mysterious circumstances, of course.
Of course. So not a good way to go. It really does show you that power can be pretty precarious, even when you're a king.
It certainly does.
A king who gets overthrown, and then, let's just say it ends badly. And then his son, Edward III, he takes over. And from what I've read, he was a much more, successful ruler.
Oh, Edward III. Now, he was a fascinating character, a skilled military leader. And politically astute, too.
So quite different from his dad, then.
Oh, yes. Quite different indeed.
In a good way, I hope.
Oh, definitely in a good way. He reignited the 100 Years' War with France, and he won some significant victories, too, like the Battle of Crécy.
I've heard of that one. Pretty famous battle.
It is. And, Edward III, he understood the importance of symbolism ceremony. He established the Order of the Garter. You know about that one, right?
Order of the Garter. Yeah. Isn't that the one with the motto? Hold on. Onis qui mal y pense.
Right, that's it. Shame on him who thinks evil of it.
Oh, I love that.
Edward III understood that to maintain power, you need more than just military strength. You need to cultivate this sense of loyalty, prestige. The Order of the Garter was, it was a way to bind the nobility to the crown.
It's like a very fancy club that you have to be loyal to get into.
Precisely.
Clever. But even a king as clever as Edward III, he couldn't escape the challenges of his time. The Black Death must have been an absolute nightmare to deal with.
Oh, the Black Death. A terrifying time. A third of Europe's population was wiped out. It's hard to even imagine the impact. The social upheaval, the economic devastation.
Yeah, makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. Edward III's reign, it started with such promise, military glory, expansion, and then it was shaped by forces completely beyond his control, just like leaders today, really.
That's true. We're all at the mercy of it, aren't we?
Yeah.
Even kings, pandemics, you name it. So speaking of complicated reigns, what about Richard II? He seems like a king who really tried to grab for more power but ended up losing it all.
Richard II, oh yes, he's a fascinating figure. Tragic too.
What happened?
Well, he came to the throne as a child, and at first he was quite popular, but as he grew older, his autocratic tendencies started to show. He clashed with Parliament.
That sounds familiar.
It does, doesn't it? It's a recurring theme. Richard, he was also known for his lavish lifestyle, and he relied heavily on a very small circle of advisors.
So kind of out of touch with what the people wanted then?
Yeah, you could say that. He lost the support of the people he was ruling. And, remember how we talked about the importance of the line of succession? Mm-hmm. Well, when Richard II was deposed, it threw everything into chaos. It sparked the Wars of the Roses.
Ah, yes. The Wars of the Roses. This is where we get that whole red rose versus white rose thing, right? It's like Game of Thrones, but in real life, families battling it out for the throne.
It really is. You've got the House of Lancaster, symbolized by the red rose, and the House of York with the white rose. It was a brutal conflict. fueled by ambition, power struggles, and, well, just plain old grudges.
So who are the main players in this whole royal rumble?
Well, on the Yorkist side, you have Richard of York and the Earl of Warwick. He was known as the Kingmaker.
The Kingmaker. That's a pretty intense nickname.
It is. He earned it, though. Warwick was a master strategist, a manipulator. He was constantly shifting alliances, orchestrating events to benefit whoever he was supporting at the time.
Wow. It sounds exhausting.
It must have been. And on the other side, you have Henry VI. He was the Lancastrian king, a very pious man, but, well, he was also considered a weak ruler.
So if he was so weak, how did he manage to stay in power for so long?
Well, that's where the Kingmaker comes in. Warwick. He was pulling the strings behind the scenes. It was a time of incredible political intrigue, backstabbing. The fate of England was at stake.
I bet there are some great stories in that period.
Oh, I'm sure there are.
Sounds like a historian's dream.
It is. Anyway, eventually Edward IV, a Yorkist leader, managed to seize power, but his reign was full of challenges and intrigue. And then he died suddenly. Yeah. And that led to one of the most enduring mysteries in British history, the fate of the princes in the Tower.
Oh yes, the princes in the Tower. Two young boys vanish. Their uncle, Richard III, he becomes king. It's a story that's captured imaginations for centuries.
It has.
What's your take on it? Do you think Richard III had them murdered to secure his claim to the throne?
It's a question historians have debated forever. There's no definitive answer, no smoking gun, so to speak, just circumstantial evidence and conflicting accounts.
It's like a historical cold case.
It is.
It makes you realize that even with all the records, the chronicles, there's still so many unanswered questions about the past.
Absolutely. And that's part of what makes history so fascinating, trying to piece together these fragments of information to understand the past and how it shapes the present.
Speaking of shaping the present, Richard III's reign didn't last very long.
No, it didn't.
He was defeated at the Battle of Bosworth Field by
Henry Tudor.
Who became Henry VII, right? And that's the start of the Tudor dynasty.
Exactly. The Tudors, a whole new chapter in British history. Henry VII was a very shrewd politician. He managed to bring some stability after decades of conflict. He effectively ended the Wars of the Roses.
Impressive. How did he do that?
Well, he made a strategic marriage to Elizabeth of York, which symbolically united the warring houses. Very clever.
I see. So the Tudors, when you say Tudors, I immediately think of Henry VIII. 6 wives breaking away from the Catholic Church. He's definitely the Tudor that comes to mind.
Henry VIII, oh yes. He's larger than life, isn't he? His pursuit of a male heir, his complicated love life, shall we say. And then, of course, defying the Pope so he could divorce Catherine of Aragon and marry Anne Boleyn.
He certainly made some bold moves.
He did. And his break from the Catholic Church, well, that was a pivotal moment. It reshaped the religious landscape of England.
Totally. It's hard to overstate the impact of that decision.
It really is. Henry VIII's desire for a divorce and his growing frustration with the Pope's authority, it all led him to declare himself the supreme head of the Church of England. A huge turning point. Not just for religion, but for the whole balance of power between the monarchy and the church.
And let's not forget about his wives. They didn't exactly have it easy, did they?
Oh, no, they didn't. From Anne Boleyn's execution to Catherine Howard's tragic fate, being married to Henry VIII was, well, let's just say it was risky.
It's like a recurring theme with these powerful monarchs, isn't it? The personal is political, and the consequences can be, well, pretty dire.
It's true, and it's something to think about as we move on to Henry VIII's children, Edward VI, Mary I, and of course the iconic Elizabeth I.
They all had some pretty big shoes to fill.
They did. Each of them inherited this incredibly complex legacy. They had to navigate religious turmoil, political intrigue, each in their own way.
I can't even imagine.
It must have been incredibly challenging. But before we delve into their stories, I want to ask you something. How do you think Henry VIII's actions, especially his break with Rome, how did that reshape the monarchy? Did it make it stronger or weaker in the long run? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a big question. It's hard to imagine making a decision that would have such a lasting impact. Like, did he even realize what he was unleashing?
It's tough to say. Historians still debate that. But one thing's for sure. His kids had to deal with the fallout.
Right, his kids. So starting with Edward VI, he was all about the Protestant Reformation, right? Like full steam ahead.
Absolutely. He was young, sure, but Edward VI was a devout Protestant. Wanted to really solidify those reforms. He introduced a more Protestant doctrine, really changed the Church of England, moved it further away from its Catholic roots.
Wow. So England just kept moving further and further away from Rome.
You could say that. But then his half-sister, Mary Nerth, she comes to the throne, and she's Catholic, devoutly Catholic.
Yeah, I can see how that would cause some problems. Talk about a religious U-turn.
It was a difficult time. Mary Ann, she was determined to bring Catholicism back to England, and that led to some pretty harsh persecution of Protestants. Earned her the nickname Bloody Mary, you know?
Yeah, I've heard that. So her reign was pretty tumultuous then.
You could say that. Her policies were definitely met with resistance, and it led to executions, social unrest.
It's a reminder of just how powerful religious beliefs can be, how they can get tied up with politics.
Oh, absolutely. They're inseparable sometimes, aren't they? And the consequences, well, they can be pretty devastating.
Yeah. It's a good thing Mary's reign didn't last very long then, huh? Thankfully, she was only queen for a few years. And then we get to the queen everyone remembers, Elizabeth I. I mean, she's an icon.
She's definitely one of the most celebrated monarchs in British history. She managed that religious divide, brought in a more moderate Protestantism, calmed things down after all the turmoil of her siblings' reigns.
She was smart, knew how to play the game.
Oh, she was a brilliant strategist, a real politician.
And her reign, it was a time of incredible cultural flourishing, right? The Elizabethan era. We think of Shakespeare, exploration, England becoming a global power.
It was a golden age. Elizabeth I, she knew how to play the international game too. A masterful diplomat. She defeated the Spanish Armada, remember?
Oh yeah, big win.
Huge. And she encouraged exploration, trade, and of course, art and literature thrived under her rule.
It sounds like she had a real talent for balancing things out,
Yeah.
keeping the old traditions, but also moving things forward.
You've got it. She understood that to stay in power, the monarchy had to adapt, keep up with the times, but also hold on to those traditions. A tough balancing act, but she pulled it off.
It's something to think about, isn't it? How do you stay relevant when the world is changing all around you?
It's a challenge for any institution, especially one as old as the monarchy.
Makes you appreciate what Elizabeth I accomplished even more.
It does. It really does.
But, even the longest reigns come to an end. And after Elizabeth I, we enter a whole new era, the Stuarts. And things get pretty dramatic.
Oh, the Stuarts. They were a handful, weren't they?
Yeah, lots of drama with the Stuarts, power struggles, religious tension, even a civil war.
It's a fascinating period, though. It really shows that ongoing battle between the monarchy and parliament.
Yeah, that seems to be a recurring theme. So first up, we've got James I. He was Mary Queen of Scots' son. So he inherited the throne after Elizabeth I died, right? And that meant that he was king of both England and Scotland.
He was. James VI of Scotland and James I of England united the crowns. But James, he wasn't exactly known for his, let's say, tact.
What do you mean?
Well, he was a big believer in the divine right of kings, that the king's power came directly from God.
Uh-oh. I can see how that wouldn't go over well with Parliament.
It didn't. He had a lot of problems. Money problems, religious tension. He even survived an assassination attempt, the gunpowder plot.
Oh yeah, Guy Fawkes and all that. Remember the 5th of November.
Exactly. Talk about a dramatic event. Really shows you how volatile things were back then. And, those tensions didn't exactly go away under James's son, Charles I.
Oh no, I've read about Charles I. He really pushed things to the limit with Parliament, didn't he?
He did. Charles I, he was even more insistent about his divine right than his father, dissolved Parliament a bunch of times, tried to rule without them for 11 years, and then he tried to force everyone to follow the same religion in England and Scotland.
That's a recipe for disaster, isn't it?
It didn't end well, no. His actions led to the English Civil War, Cavaliers versus Roundheads.
Right. It's amazing to think that England went through a civil war.
It was a brutal conflict, a defining moment, really, in British history. On one side, you had the Royalists, the Cavaliers, supporting Charles I, and on the other side, the Parliamentarians, led by Oliver Cromwell.
Cromwell. Now, there's a fascinating character, a devout Puritan, who, he basically overthrew the monarchy.
He did. He was a brilliant military strategist. And, in the end, he signed Charles I's death warrant.
Wow. So Cromwell was the one who abolished the monarchy.
He did. After the parliamentarians won the war, he established the Commonwealth. No more king. Cromwell became the Lord Protector. It was an attempt to create a republic, but it didn't last.
So first, no king, and then the monarchy comes back.
Exactly. That's a restoration. Charles II, Charles I's son, he came back to the throne in 1660, but things were different. Parliament had shown its power. The idea of a king who could do whatever he wanted, that was pretty much over.
So that's a big turning point then.
Huge. But the religious problems, they didn't go away. Charles II's brother, James II, he was Catholic.
Oh, that's right.
And when he became king, a lot of people worried that he'd try to bring back Catholicism and maybe even absolute monarchy. And that led to, well, the Glorious Revolution.
The Glorious Revolution, another big showdown between the monarchy and parliament, and I think I remember how this one ends. William of Orange.
You're on the right track. Parliament actually invited William of Orange to come to England. He was Protestant, you see, and married to James II's daughter, Mary.
Ah, okay. Family ties.
Right. So William comes over, overthrows James II, pretty bloodless, really, considering. And then William and Mary, they become joint monarchs.
So we go from one king to two. And this is where we get the Bill of Rights, right? Which basically says Parliament is in charge.
Precisely. The Bill of Rights, super important. Guaranteed certain rights for Parliament, for the people, put even more limits on the power of the monarchy. And that's how you get a constitutional monarchy.
So after all that turmoil, all that back and forth, a new kind of government emerges.
It does. Monarchy and Parliament sharing power.
It's amazing, really, how all these centuries of conflict, all those compromises, they shaped how Britain is governed today.
It's a fascinating journey, isn't it? From William and Mary, we go through Queen Anne, the Hanoverian kings, and we see the British Empire growing, the Industrial Revolution changing everything. And through it all, the monarchy is, well, it's evolving, trying to figure out its place in a world that's changing so fast.
And of course, we get to the modern monarchs. Queen Victoria, longest reigning monarch until Elizabeth II.
And an incredible era.
Yeah, and then Edward VII, George V, that brief time with Edward VIII who abdicated, and then George VI leading Britain through World War II.
And then, of course, Elizabeth II. The queen we all knew, her reign was extraordinary. She saw the British Empire become the Commonwealth, witnessed so much change.
She really was a symbol of continuity, wasn't she? Through so many decades.
Absolutely. She embodied that adaptability, that ability to stay relevant.
Well, wow, what a journey this has been. From William the Conqueror to Elizabeth II, from conquering a country to navigating a globalized world.
And it's not over yet. The monarchy continues. But it's a good time to stop and think, to reflect on this incredible history.
You're right. So as we wrap up our deep dive into British monarchs, what's the main takeaway you want our listeners to ponder?
I think it's this. The story of the British monarchy, it's so much more than just kings and queens, you know? It's a mirror, reflecting how power works, how religion shapes things, how society changes. It's all there.
It's a story that's still being written too.
Exactly. And I think that's the most exciting part.
It is. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into British monarchy. We've covered a lot of ground today. And as always, we hope this has sparked your curiosity to learn even more. So keep exploring, keep asking questions. Until next time.